talk about physician finance. All right. So Chris Henslee, you're an emergency anesthesiologist, among other things. You've seen a lot of things in not only the medical field, but the financial world, which has brought us to this point. And I want to let Elizabeth introduce herself, but I want you to tell us real quick, just in a very short summary, what this mission is that brings us here today.
Well, so we're here just to promote physician financial health. So, I mean, this is an area where people, physicians have particular difficulty, and it just comes down to being very intelligent people who are highly focused in one area, and that causes neglect in another area. You only have so much bandwidth. And so if somebody's going to be successful in their career, and if, after the amount of time that you devote to your career as a physician, then you've got to pick. So it's either you're going to have a successful family and marriage, or you're going to be successful financially, or you're going to be able to play golf or something else. But you're not going to be able to do all of those things. And so often physicians think that they are smart enough to be able to do it all themselves. They think, because of their extreme work ethic and intelligence, that they can do it. And that results in financial ruin and divorce, and children that don't like you very much when they're 20-something years old, and maybe a halfway decent golf game. But it's really unfortunate. And so the mission for me is just to bring awareness to physicians about this issue, and at least give them some ammunition to take care of the financial aspect, and to be able to devote some of their time to those other things that are truly more important.
That's awesome. And so when we said we should talk about physician finance, I thought we should bring an actual professional to this discussion. So we have Elizabeth with us, who is the actual professional. Elizabeth, tell us a little bit about yourself. You have a great career, what you have done in the past, and what you're doing now.
I basically work with clients who generally, I have a lot of entrepreneurial clients. I do have some healthcare providers and a lot of real estate developers. But mostly I work with clients just to solve problems, or to strategize on how to minimize tax or maximize your net worth, and kind of help coach them on what to do with their money. And I have, a lot of experience, since I work myself 60 hours a week for 30 years on this. I've got exponential amount of work experience, but it's really been a very satisfying, very rewarding experience when I see clients make that shift and make a great decision for themselves to improve their own life or their business, or actually their family and their legacy.
And would you say you work with the majority high net worth folks, or ultra high net worth folks?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Some of who, do you have any clients that come into money fairly quickly, like a physician, where they, Chris has mentioned there's a switch that flips, right?
Yes. So one good example might be, I was called in recently to work with a family that just won the $400 million lottery. So they went from nothing to all very quickly. What that $400,000 lottery means when you get a one-time payout is more like $280, and then when you take the taxes out, you're probably down to about $130, $140. But that's still a ton of money.
Gosh, only $140 million.
Yes.
No.
When you're 68 and 75,
wow.
You might as well take the one-time payout. But they immediately sought legal, banking, and then I was referred by the attorney and the banker to help them kind of strategize, first of all, to minimize tax, to transfer the wealth to their children and grandchildren. And I just had several meetings with them, what do you think about this? The first instinct was, of course, to buy lots of multi-million dollar homes and cars that they never had. So that's great. But we still have, that was the fun money. But we're just trying to really make this grow and last for generations of their family.
So these are folks quite a bit like the physician market, where they didn't have, for 68, 70 years, they lived, what would you say, a middle income, low income? What kind of?
I would say, they were both pharmacists and well-educated, and both had, quite a bit of experience financially. They were savers. They did own real estate and rental real estate, and so they were somewhat savvy on investing and saving. But of course, this was a huge blessing windfall for them.
So a decent middle income lifestyle,
Yeah.
but they were never going to the Met Gala.
No.
Okay, and now they are.
Yes, now they can.
Just, one comment on that. So just a plug for Elizabeth, because you don't get referred somebody like that from the bank without a reputation. And I feel lucky to work with Elizabeth and her firm. And it goes to her clients. I mean, she's, she doesn't pump herself up too much, but she works with extraordinarily successful people, and those relationships are built through years and through success. So she's, very proven track record.
So we picked the right professional to
Yes.
be here today.
Exactly.
Well, cheers, Elizabeth.
Exactly.
Well done.
Cheers.
So let me just stop at a point where I think this has come up in our conversations. When the windfall happens, or when the doctor signs the contract, the first instinct, even with someone that had a decent life and new investments and clearly had properties and things that 94% of the world never will have, right? So they've experienced some of that, and yet the first instinct was, what can I go spend money on?
Yes.
And you said you see that all the time when you've not had something for so long, you've delayed gratification for so long. Probably the first big mistake that a doctor or physician makes is signing that first contract and then starting to sign checks.
Absolutely.
So how did you keep that family from that? And maybe that applies.
We created a couple of 4 irrevocable trusts. So that's where you put your money in and you can't touch it. It will be there for your children and grandchildren. So that's a nice way to lock it up. That's kind of a permanent decision, because you can't revoke it. So you can't get that money back out. But there are just, I think, they were very concerned about what to invest in, to be honest, and I encouraged them not to rush. The bank was kind of like wanting them to get right into managed
Sure.
money, but I was like, hold on, let's just do the T-bills right now, or the short-term treasuries for 6 weeks. Let's just give ourselves a little time so you don't feel forced. I think that is the biggest lesson right there. It's just, okay, you got this new income that you're not used to, and yes, you have delayed gratification. You do want some material things, but think about what you're spending it on. Generally, except for the COVID pandemic, a vehicle is widely a depreciating asset. So that's not an investment. So it is nice, to cruise on down the road with your Ferrari, but when someone dings the door, it's pretty devastating.
That sounds like personal experience.
And, just always like thinking, you always think there's going to be tomorrow. I had a doctor made over $1 million a year easily, anesthesiologist, and he, had to have the boat, the $18,000 a month mortgage payment. Everything was financed, and then he injured his hand, so he could not work, and his disability was nowhere near his salary, and he wound up, getting divorced and just very bitter with his wife and kind of blaming her for the house that they both invested in together. But it was a very unhappy story, so you don't know what's going to happen. So like that rainy day kind of like idea of preservation and growth of what you've got without having to feel that stress, because he was so, overwhelmed by the debt. He was literally sobbing in my office. And I'm like, well, I mean, you made some of these choices too. Did you need the $18,000 a month mortgage payment? Right now he'd really be crying if it had happened now, because of course the variable rate that he had on the loan would have been tripled in this last year. So also that's a very common thing that I see is the financing, the debt. It can strangle you, literally, mentally, physically, spiritually. So trying to leverage yourself, which everyone says to do, you read Rich Dad, Poor Dad, put $1 down, and you're going to have a cash flowing empire overnight, is not reality.
I think it's important also to point out that those things are fine, but it's the timing of those things, right? And I think that's what you've alluded to. Everything goes back to music for me. So, you can play 90% of every popular song written since the 40s with 4 chords. And if you can do that, and it's that simple, it's not easy, but it's simple. How do you apply that here? And I think there's 4 steps that cover this. And the first step is generate income, which you're doing already, right? We're doing that. But the second step seems like a no-brainer, which is spend less than you generate. You have to do that. So that's but let's put this in anatomy or medical terms. If I don't want to be a diabetic, I have to diet and exercise. Okay. But when I go on a diet, they always give me a little cheat something. If you follow this diet, but on a Friday, you can have some, what's your poison? Chocolate? Or
sure.
Nuts? I don't know.
Tequila.
All right. Well, there's no calories or any negative effects to tequila, Elizabeth. So
of course not.
No, this is fair game on all diets. But they always tell you that because they know, the smart dietitians know, that if it's too strict and too difficult, you're just not going to do it. So is there something where you would say, if you're going to cheat, this is how you would cheat, or this is the best way to cheat? So, okay, doc, you're about to sign up. You're about to come into some money. We're telling you, don't spend it. Live like a resident. But if you have to feel like you want some of this gratification, is there something that you might say, okay, I'll give you a pass on this one. Go get your Tesla. Just don't get the $18,000 mortgage and the boat and all those other. I mean, is that viable, or do you think if that little window is opened, then they jump out?
No, I think you need to have some rewards in there. So I think everybody needs rewards. I mean, why live without reward? So I think it's important to plan for those things, but those are like the treats, not. And if you can pay cash, even better. Like go in.
Yeah, well, that's actually where I was going to go. I mean, so if so my wife, I guess that was a year and a half, 2 years ago, maybe 2 years ago. She had only had used cars since we have been together, and so I bought her a new Cadillac Escalade. And so, what did I do? I paid 50% in cash. Then I took a loan out of our retirement that we're paying back to ourselves with interest, and so for the other half. And so I structured it in such a way that the money that we were borrowing was pretty minimal, and then also that I was paying myself back into my retirement account with interest. And so, I'm happy to do that, even though it's a low interest rate. And so I don't feel bad about that. And I know that money is going to end up right back there instead of in the hands of, a bank. So I think the trick is to, you have this bucket, like we talked about. You have this income that, all of a sudden it's here. And that's the maximum that a physician is going to have right out of residency within the first 3 or 4 years. We talked about this in the last podcast. And that's it. That's what they're going to make.
And for those of you that are just listening, Chris is holding his hand above his head when he says
that's right. That's right. It can be a lot of money.
Bucket.
It can be a lot of money.
Bucket.
But the issue is that, you start making those commitments, and you make those commitments through debt, and then you're chipping away at all of that income. And before you know it, the savings is very small, the commitments are high, and then you have a life event like kids or whatever it may be. And all of a sudden, you're really struggling.
Yeah, very quickly.
And I think the idea of a coach, and I think that's what you're talking about here, is you've got to have somebody like Elizabeth or a bona fide financial advisor that can sit with you during that time and go, yes, the Escalade, you want the Escalade. It's the right time 60 days from now or 90 days from now when you can structure it the way you described versus going out the next day and getting it, not thinking it through, putting it on a full note, putting nothing down and having that depreciating asset. Or a coach that might say, it's not the Escalade yet. Maybe that's next year, but you go ahead and get your wife a new car and maybe keep it in this range. Somebody that can talk you through that and push back on you a little bit, I think is necessary. I know it is. I always relate it back to the diet because I struggle with the diet all of the time. But when you have someone there keeping accountable, if you do a diet with another person, it's much easier than a diet on your own and that other person is drinking the tequila right across the table from you, right? But if you've got someone there, a coach, that can say, here's the plan. You don't have to delay this gratification for a year. That's what I struggled with when you said, live like a resident. In my mind, I'm thinking, yeah, but I've been living like a resident. I want to live like a doc now, right? So, but if I could have just a taste of that, that might be enough to get me through where I don't make all the bad choices all at once.
Right. Well, it's a progressive change. So I'm not advocating for never living like, you make a lot of money. I'm saying that, just as you advised these clients, like just pump the brakes for a second. Like, let's do something that buys you some time. Let's, for that amount of money, okay, it's 6 weeks. That was great. But for, a new physician, it's, 6 months, a year, and then it's a little step up and a little, step higher every 6 months, do something. But, you've got a race to catch up to all of that educational time that you spent where you weren't saving and weren't investing. And so you really, if you want to take advantage of the salary, the wealth that you could accumulate, then it has to accumulate fast in the beginning. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think a little bit, how I think of it for myself, I'm not, even though I am an accountant, I'm not a huge budgeteer. Like, I don't plan out how much I'm going to spend. I look at my credit card bill every month and I'm like, ooh. I always pay it in full, But I'm always thinking, like, if I want to get ahead, then yes, I can. I took my kids an amazing, I kind of splurged on our Airbnb in Puerto Vallarta for Thanksgiving and flew everybody from everywhere to get there, and it was amazing, and we all had a fantastic time, and it was an expensive trip, but that was a trip. And like the rest of the year, like, I'm always trying to save a little bit more so I can invest in something else that's actually going to improve my income, because if I spend it all down or incur a lot of debt, then I don't have that available. So if I earn that much in investment earnings, yeah, I can afford the vacation and I'm still making more money.
You know what? I think this is a critical concept that people, I think they may know, or maybe they don't, but it's obvious once it's stated. And that is that, investing, a lot of times it's really not that hard. I mean, like I think maybe it was Warren Buffett, somebody at his caliber said something like, well, investing is just sitting back and, you wait until, the time is right, and then, you put your chips on the table. I mean, when there are periodically obvious times to invest a certain way. And those times are the times when everybody is in dire straits. So if you are able to accumulate some cash and ability to invest during those times where there's turmoil, then you can do well. So, if that's just part of your habit and your strategy, then, you're going to do just fine.
I think the great piece of advice is just wait. Like you said, let's give it 6 weeks. I don't know that I've ever had a client come back to me and said, I really regret waiting a few weeks.
Yeah.
Right? It's hard. That's hard to. Like we're in a civilization where everything is instant. Almost everything is instant. And if it's not instant, we get really pissed off. So how do you then say, but just wait and be patient? I think that's this mental concept. But probably the rule number one is just be patient when that happens, right? Give it some time. You mentioned, so step 3 in my thought process is protect the income, right? Once you started to generate the income, you have to protect it. So if you own real estate that's generating income, make sure that that's the right insurance on that. Or if you have an investment account, make sure you're hedging your investment account correctly. A doctor's income is hedged by paycheck protection, some insurance agent called, or disability insurance. And I think it's almost impossible to design an insurance contract on your own. In fact, I think it's almost impossible for most insurance agents to design the correct one after all of them. And I'm sure that you have looked at, and you mentioned in your example, that it was maybe pennies on the dollar of what he was making. So is this the situation when you get to this, you've signed that contract, you're making income, you need that person, someone like you or a coach that says, we have to look at this protection of that income, and you have to protect it to the max, because when you break your hand, you're out.
Yeah, definitely. And having disability insurance and life insurance is critical. I mean, if you're the main provider for your whole family and you're it, and something happens to you, like what happens to your family? Because if you don't have anything saved and you don't have insurance, how are they going to survive?
And it's more than financial, right? What kills me is it's a ripple effect, like that Butterfly Effect movie with Ashton Kutcher. Very underrated movie, but great.
Great movie.
When something happens, you think, well, this is a financial decision. But in your instance, it led to all kinds of things that weren't financial, right? That just literally could destroy a person. Mm-hmm. All because you made the wrong financial decision up front, which was don't spend the money for the right policy or get the right policy.
Yeah.
So it's not just financial.
No.
A lot of this is mental, I think, too. And then it just cascades.
Well, this is one of the number one things that couples fight about, right? It's finance. Mm-hmm. So if you can get ahead of that and structure it correctly and, have that discussion where you're on the same page and you don't have that stress, then your relationship is going to be better for sure than with the stress, right?
And it's very crippling. I mean, the whole reason I'm an accountant is because my dad went bankrupt. We lost everything. I was like 6 years old. We were on like food stamps, welfare. My mom was on, 3 kids under 6 and under, and it ruined their marriage. They got divorced. The whole host of things happened. And then, so he was borrowing money from me at age 12 to buy the TV for the family room. I'll pay you interest. Wow. Because I had like all these little jobs, babysitting and all this stuff. And then he was so compulsive, he filed bankruptcy again. So he like.
And you were one of the creditors? Wow. That's a new one.
But he was always he was the most amazing dad, but he was just always crippled by, this held him back in so many ways because the guilt and then it's a whole thing. It's a whole thing.
It's a whole thing. Wow. Okay, part 2, physician finance. So we ended the last one talking about the non-financial ramifications of this, and I think docs are in a very unique position. So you had a story that you told us about a doctor. Tell me that again.
The doctor that overspent.
No, you were telling me about a doctor that was doing it for the family, right? And I'm throwing
yes.
up air quotes, right?
So,
and when I say doing it, I mean working to the bone.
I mean, he was working to the bone. He made great money. He picked up a second gig working in a hospital part of the time, and he felt like he was doing everything he could for his family. He felt like he reduced his travel time. He lives in Nebraska, so he has to travel from office to office, which is not close by. But he was like, I've kind of cut back, and I thought I was doing all the right things. And my wife just cleaned out my account this weekend and took 2/3 of the money and put it in her own account. and he has 4 kids, 10 and under, and he's like, I don't know if I'm getting divorced now or what's happening, but, you know, obviously the trust was broken, and he's like, I thought I was doing the right thing for the family, but I guess maybe that's not what I should have been doing.
Another non-financial ramification, but it's a conundrum for you guys, right? Because you have to put in the hours. You're used to putting in the hours. And so you mentioned, Chris, when there's discussion between the spouses, which we talked about applies to everybody. Financial stress applies to probably every household in America, right? But the flip side of that conversation for you is, well, I'll work more if I need to get out of financial stress. If you're solely reliant on your salary, right? Your physician wages. And then what happens?
Right. So, you know, I think this comes down to, you know, one of the core tenets of happiness in life, right? And that's met versus unmet expectations. And so, you know, going back to that story of, you know, you're beginning to, you're doing all of these things and it's based on debt, and then you have, you know, this lifestyle that builds up, and that's based on a very high income, then you can't escape that lifestyle because you have this debt burden that must be paid, and that requires the hours in the hospital, which leads to neglect of relationships, and then, you know, so you've maintained this lifestyle, but ultimately then you may lose these relationships that you thought you were supporting, and, you know, that can feel, you know, doubly difficult, right? So, I mean, you feel like you're sacrificing by being in the hospital and doing, you know, putting all of these hours in at work, and you're sacrificing for the benefit of these relationships and these people, and then ultimately you have neglected them to the point where you lose them, and so that can be. I can see how that can be extremely painful. You know, I'm lucky that hasn't happened to me. We've had very strong relationships, and I've been able to cut back as the years have gone on. But that I think really goes to what I think your next subject is, which is, you know, creating alternate streams of income.
Well, yeah, you've got to live by those first 3 steps first, which is spend less than you make, right? Step 2, the biggest one. And if you're not doing that, then that pressure is always on you. It has to be. And the only way to relieve that pressure is to spend more time in the hospital. And then you're the bad guy for spending more time in the hospital, or the bad girl, right? So how do we get out of that rat race? If you are spending less than you make, and you've protected your income, you're already generating a decent income, and Elizabeth, you talked about paying for a vacation with your kids and your family, and what your mind thinks of when you want to pay for things. Tell me again what that is.
Well, in addition to running a CPA firm, I started a hard money lending business. So luckily I have amazing clients that have lots of money to lend. But I invested my money in there too, and I created alternative retirement plans for a bunch of my clients, and we all invest in that same fund. So we take first deeds of trust on real estate. So there's some work in the beginning. You got to research and make sure this is the right property and make sure you've got all the docs in order, but then you just collect. So it's an alternative income stream that I don't have to actively work on each day of my life. And that has really helped me. And then I, you know, have real estate where I'm collecting rents. So yes, I do have to attend to maintenance requests, but I have these other streams of income coming in that I don't have to show up to generate every day. So when I look at my earnings for the year, I look at what that extra income is from the money I've made, and then I don't feel so guilty with myself for spending a little bit of that on splurging on a lavish vacation.
I mean, that's a perfect example of that 4th step, right? And let's be clear, you can live a wealthy life and a good life without that 4th step, without those alternative incomes. And I would say 99% of the clients that I run into, and probably the world in general, lives their life without that last step, but to really be financially free, to take it to that point. And I identify financial freedom as having all the money you need or want and all the time you need or want at the same time, right? If you have one or the other, you're still not there. But if you have them both, you've nailed it. And the absolute only way that I have figured out to get there is what you just said, which is we have to create alternate income streams that are unrelated to our primary income stream, that may take a little bit of work up front, but eventually don't require my input of time to make that income stream. So Chris, help me with examples, because you're active in this alternate income stream environment. Give me some examples, or what can docs do, especially ones that are just getting out of residency, where they're not even thinking this yet. They're probably on step 2, which is spend less than I make, and we're coaching that, right? But knowing that the end game to true financial freedom is those alternate income streams, what can we say to them right now?
Well, step 1 is to have something to invest, as I spoke, as I talked about before. But once you're to that point where you have something to invest in one of these income-generating entities, then you have to have relationships. I mean, if you're not talking to people, and if you don't have somebody who can properly vet what you're considering going into, then it is likely to end in disaster. So you need trusted advisors who can evaluate deals for you and who are experts in the area that you're considering investing in. And then you look for people like, Elizabeth. If I invest in, I'm not currently invested in this hard money lending, but if she opened that up to me and, asked if I wanted to be involved in that, then I'd have zero hesitation, because there's a track record there. The people who I know who are her clients, as well as she has skin in the game, and she personally has a track record of success, then I don't need to hesitate. I can go right into that. We had a dinner the other night with an individual who he built his own bank using his own funds and family funds, and they're doing something similar. And I wouldn't hesitate to invest with him, because again, it's relationships. I know the person, and before he opened up his bank to anyone else, he wanted a 10-year track record of success for himself and for his family before even considering an outside investor. So that's the type of person who's trustworthy, that you can go ahead and take that leap of faith with. But again, proper vetting is absolutely essential.
And that takes time, right? I mean, you have two options, in my opinion. You either have extreme trust or extreme knowledge. You're either going to trust that person that you're investing in, whatever they've created, or you better know what you're investing in. And it's hard to have that knowledge. I imagine physicians want the knowledge, but you can't go deep into anything. I mean, we just cleared a private placement I was looking at, a real estate, and it was 859 pages of due diligence. Well, if that's not somebody's full-time job, how do you go about that? And another question I'd like to ask, and so this is a two-part question. How many degrees of separation would you consider that trust goes? Is it, I know a guy who knows a guy who knows a guy? Or is it only, I know a guy and they're the person? Like, where is that line?
I really have to know the person direct. I can't trust someone
You're not taking a
else's.
recommendation from somebody else that's not operating that investment.
Right. So I would take a recommendation to introduce myself to it, but I would never just leap on it.
Then you do the due diligence. Yeah. Then the knowledge comes. So there's a little bit of trust and then the knowledge for you.
Yeah, for me.
Yes.
Yeah.
And you're in the game, right? So if you're not, if your full-time gig is at the hospital, how do you balance that trust versus knowledge? Is there a little of both for you?
I'm so incredibly type A that I can't help myself. So one of the companies that I invested in a few years ago, there was a they were doing some spin outs, and there was a prospectus, and I read the entire thing with all of the legal jargon, just like you said. I mean, it was a book, and I still have it in my closet. And
by the way, that is not an interesting read.
No, it's not. It's not. And I asked questions, and the people who were running the company, I've got close relationships with them, and so I was a little bit naive for sure back then, and I was sending revisions and here's a spelling error, there's a comma here, I mean it was when I say I'm type A, I've got pages and pages and pages of where the lawyers forgot a comma or whatever. I mean, I got about halfway through it, and before I realized I wasn't being helpful, that this was the final draft.
They weren't going to change the prospectus for you?
This was already the final document. This wasn't a work in progress. And for me, I don't know. It's just my personality. I can't turn it off.
So it's a both, right? It's a trust for the introduction. You take someone's word on the referral, and then you dive deep.
Yes.
Yeah, that's probably pretty smart.
But I think you also need validation. So even me, I work in tax all day long, but I had a client, and this was several years ago, that didn't just canceled his sales tax licenses and owns stores and where we all shop. And just hasn't been paying sales taxes, but collecting it from the customers. And he hired me to assist him. And I was like, this is what I think you should do, because I'm a very proactive person. You can't look back. You got to look forward. You just got to do the right thing moving forward. If you try to, it's overwhelming. Anyway. So
otherwise they do nothing at all. If you present them with a solution,
paralyzing. Yeah. Go back and fix all that stuff. Let's at least get going forward, and then maybe I can make some kind of argument along the way. But I consulted, and now this attorney is the top state and local tax attorney in the state of Arizona, and I'm sure he's more now. I mean, this is several years ago. He was $7.95 an hour, which seems staggering. But to go in there and meet with him for 2 hours, which the client paid for, was validating. He's like, I wouldn't do anything different than what I recommended, but I believe in seeking professional advice, whether it's a financial advisor who's totally dialed into whatever their specialty is, or a doctor, or an attorney. Yes, you probably can't figure it out yourself. It's going to take a while, and you're not going to have that real life experience. I would never imagine doing anything medically. Honestly, the whole thing. Somebody's throwing up. I'm throwing up. I'm not helpful. I can't do it. But I mean, just all those years of experience in that topic is priceless to me.
There's no doubt if you don't go through it, you don't know how to go through it.
Right.
The worst thing that's happened to you is the worst thing that's happened to you, right? So, I lost $200,000 last year in a pharmaceutical company. And guess who knows nothing about pharmaceuticals? Yeah, this guy. But somebody knew somebody that knew somebody that said, hey, this is going to be the next big drug. Okay, let me give it a shot. And when you learn that lesson the hard way, and I've been a part of other private placements in the real estate sector, the merchant cash advance, all these. I mean, if you want to invest in something, it's there, right? But when you see those things take the turns and why they take the turns, if you're not intimately involved in that, then it's just an article you're reading. But if you've lost the money or your client's money in those things, then the next time it comes to you, you can say, I got this one. It ain't happening this way again, because it already happened once. But unless you see it, I mean, how many thousands of situations do you have to see in the operating room where, we talked to your friend that I think is a neurosurgeon, and I fully admitted to him, if I could have my first 10 years of practice back, I'd want them back, because I know things now I didn't know, and it wasn't because I didn't have the book knowledge. I went through all the courses and all the CFP, everything that you have to do to get there. But until you feel it and you have it happen, you don't really know, right? So you got to find a team. And I think it's not part of the 4 steps. And you made a really good point. You can do the 4 steps on your own. You don't need to have anybody else around you to do that. But you want to supercharge those and rinse and repeat and do those 4 steps 20 times in your life, you better have a team that knows what the hell they're talking about in each of their specific roles, right? And then your vetting is not the individual investment, although, Chris, you may still vet the individual investment, but your vetting focuses on the person. You vet that person that's on your team, and you know that they would not make a recommendation to you that wasn't validated, that wasn't cleared through multiple years of experience and having seen those things, and then you can sleep at night.
Absolutely. And I'd say that experience, reading that prospectus was, it was invaluable, but, was there a lot of it that I didn't understand? Of course, there was a ton of it, but it was really more, it gave me experience in doing it, and it helped me to understand what I didn't know and where I lacked knowledge, and that was probably the most valuable thing going through that.
I could read 10 books about putting on a tourniquet, but unless I'm in downtown Metro Phoenix in the emergency room when the gunshot victim comes in, I don't know, right?
Absolutely. Yes, absolutely. So experience is key, and I think developing this team, that really is the core message that I'd like to get out there. And I again, make myself available to anybody who hears this message. Any physician that's in training who wants to hear more, then I'm available, and my contact information will be available. And I've developed a team of people that I'm confident in, that I know you're at least not going to have the management risk. You'll have investment risk. There is nothing without risk, and your level of risk tolerance, you can make your decisions based on that if you are somebody who has enough insight to know your own risk tolerance, which is questionable for probably 90% of the people. But at least you know that you're going to have competent people. And I was telling you a story actually after the last podcast that I think is, really puts a fine point on this. So who's on your team is critical. I have a partner who recently bought a home, and she sought the advice of her financial advisor. And to shorten the question, she basically just said, how much can I spend? How much should I spend on a house? And his response was, whatever you want. And that is, that's terrible. That's not a financial advisor. That's not helpful. And that may seem obvious in this context, but the reality is that, that's most people's financial advisors. They're not there really as your advocate. They're there to collect your money and invest it, and they get a piece of it, and they're not part of your team. They're just somebody who you happen to pick and you happen to be giving money to, and you talk to once or twice a year, and that's not who you need. You need somebody where there's an open dialogue and there's a plan, and somebody who's keyed in to other individuals, that the orbits around them are significant as well and important. So,
And that experience, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
All right, so we covered all 4 steps. We covered you got to generate the income, which physicians do really well. You have to spend less than you make, which nobody does really well. You got to protect the income, and then you have to figure out those alternate streams. What do we want to leave people with?
You can do it.
You can do it. I love that. I absolutely. And by the way, is your client? I mean, is the threshold 400 million now? You don't take anyone less than the 400? No. Okay. So the right people are here. Well, we've given a lot of advice to physicians and really to anybody that comes into wealth or finds himself in that position without having help before. But let me ask you a question. You have kiddos? How many kiddos do you have?
3.
3 kiddos. If this was the last thing they listened to, what would you tell them?
Live it up.
Live it up.
But, moderately.
Spoken like a true mother. Well, thank you both for being here. I hope this helps people. Certainly enlightens me, and it's nice to sit at the table with real professionals. Cheers.
Cheers.
Acrylic Financial Incorporated is a registered investment advisor, and the opinions expressed by those on this show are their own and do not reflect the opinions of Acrylic Financial. All statements and opinions expressed are based upon information considered reliable, although it should not be relied upon as such. Any statements or opinions are subject to change without notice. Information presented is for educational purposes only and does not intend to make an offer or solicitation for the sale or purchase of any specific securities, investments, or investment strategies. Investments involve risk and unless otherwise stated are not guaranteed. Information expressed does not take into account your specific situation or objectives and is not intended as recommendations appropriate for any individual. Listeners are encouraged to seek advice from a qualified tax, legal, or investment advisor to determine whether any information presented may be suitable for their specific situation. Past performance is not indicative of future performance, and some guests may have been paid a fee to be interviewed for this show.